Hey besties, today I'm going to show you how to make this quilted ruffle zipper pouch.
You can find the pattern on my website at groovyooze.com.
Here's the list of items you'll need for this project. A rotary cutter, a fabric pen or something to mark your fabric clips or pins, fabric scissors, and a measuring tape. You'll need a zip that measures at least 9 inches, a lobster swivel clasp, a D-ring, and there's also the option to add your own personalised label. You can use the guides at the top of each page to check that your pattern is printed correctly. Cut down the right hand side of pages 1 and 2. Make sure the triangles on each of the pages meet, and then you can use tape or glue to stick it in place. Once that's done, you can cut around each of the pattern pieces. From your main panel pattern piece, you need to cut 2 outer pieces of fabric, 2 lining pieces of fabric, and 2 pieces of batting. You need 1 long piece of ruffle fabric, 1 D-ring tab piece, 1 wristlet piece, and 1 zipper tab piece. Place your outer fabric for the main panel on top of your batting, right side facing up. You can either baste stitch around the outer edge, or if you're using a fusible batting like me, iron it to hold it in place. Repeat this step with the other outer panel. Using the main panel pattern piece as a guide, mark the centre notch on both of the outer fabrics. Now we're going to quilt both of those outer panels. You can either mark all of your quilting lines using a fabric pen and a ruler, or you can use a quilting guide bar to guide you straight through if you just want to do straight lines. Using a regular straight stitch and using the edge of my sewing foot as a guide, I sew my first row of stitches all the way down. You don't need to worry about back stitching any of these quilting stitches. I then line my quilting guide bar up with that first row of stitches, and again I just sew straight down. I repeat these steps all the way along my fabric, and then I do the exact same thing for the second outer panel. Once both of the panels are quilted, I trim away the excess threads. If you'd like to add your own personalised label, we're going to add that now. You can pop yours wherever you want to. I like to find my centre notch and then put my label an inch or 2 down from there. Once your label is nice and secure, you can pop the outer panels to one side while we move on to the ruffles. Fold the ruffle fabric in half lengthways, right sides together. Clip or pin to hold them in place. Repeat this with the opposite side. Using a regular straight stitch, sew down each of those short edges. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. And this is what it should look like. Next, trim your seam allowance so that it looks like this. Doing this will give you a really crisp point when you turn it right side out. Turn the fabric right side out and then give the whole strip a really good iron. The fabric I was using for this had really started to fray, so I decided to overlock the raw edge. This is completely optional, you don't have to do this. You want to make sure your sewing machine is set to a straight stitch with the longest stitch length, and you want it to be the highest tension. Using these settings will cause the fabric to gather, which is exactly what we want to create our ruffles. With your presser foot lined up to the raw edge of the fabric, you now want to sew one long line of stitches from one end to the other without back stitching at the beginning or the end. If your fabric hasn't gathered enough, gently pull on the bobbin thread and slide the fabric along. Keep doing this until your ruffles have reached the desired length. Once that's done, you can pop those to one side while we move on to the zipper tabs. Place your zipper tab fabric so the right side is facing down and the wrong side is facing up. Fold the fabric in half lengthways and give it a good iron. Open the fabric back up and then fold each of the sides to meet that center line and give it a really good iron. You can then fold the fabric in half again and give it one final iron. We now have one long zipper tab piece. To turn this into two, fold that in half, find the center point and then you can just snip it. Now you have two zipper tabs. If, like mine, your zip is longer than 9 inches, you're going to want to cut it down. Use your measuring tape and your fabric pen to make the marks, and then I'd recommend using a regular pair of scissors to cut down your zipper. If you use your fancy fabric scissors, you will end up blunting them. You can now sandwich each end of the zipper inside the tabs. I like to use clips to hold it in place. Make sure you're pushing the open end closed and aligning the zip as much as you possibly can. It's now time to switch our regular sewing foot to our zipper foot. Using a regular straight stitch, you want to sew across each of the zipper tabs, sew as close as you can to the edge and make sure you go really slow when you're going over the zipper teeth. Sometimes I even like to use the hand wheel to guide me over these points. There's no need to backstitch at the beginning or the end. Fold the zip in half and mark the centre point on each side. I like to just notch these with my scissors like so. You can also now trim the sides of the zipper tabs so that they line up nice with the edges of the zip. Place a zip right side facing down along the top edge of one of the outer panels, matching up the centre point of the zipper to the centre notch of the outer panel. Use clips or pins to hold it in place. You'll notice that the zip is shorter than the outer panel. This will make sense later. Starting from the edge of your zipper tab, line up your sewing foot with the raw edge of your fabric. Using a regular straight stitch, sew all the way down, back stitching at the beginning and the end. To prevent the bulk of the zip getting in the way, I like to sew down as far as I can, and once I'm about an inch away from the zipper pull, I stop sewing, pop my needle into the fabric, lift up the presser foot, and then I just carefully close the zipper. Once that's nicely out of the way, I pop my presser foot back down and continue to sew. Now place the lining panel on top, right sides together. Make sure you're matching up those centre notches. Clip or pin to hold it in place. You'll now see that we have the main panel and the lining panel with the zipper sandwiched in between. You now want to sew the lining in place. I like to flip the fabric over and use those first zipper stitches as my guide. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Again, once I get close to that zipper pull, I stop sewing, pop my needle into the fabric, lift up the presser foot, and then carefully open the zipper. Once that's nicely out of the way, I pop the presser foot back down and continue to sew. Once that's done, you can open up the fabric and move the lining and the outer panel to one side. And now it's time to repeat those same steps for the other side of the zipper. I've added a couple of clips to hold my lining and outer panels together. This is just going to keep everything out of the way while we work on the other side. Place the second outer panel onto the zip, right sides together. Match up those centre notches and then clip or pin to hold it in place. So all the way along, backstitching at the beginning and the end. Again, I just like to use the edge of my presser foot as a guide. Now place the lining so the pretty sides of the fabric are facing each other. Again, I like to flip my fabric over and use those zipper stitches as my guide. Once all the layers are attached, take the fabric over to your ironing board and iron each side away from the zipper. We're doing this to prevent the fabric getting caught in the zipper when we open and close it. Once that's nicely ironed, we're going to sew a top stitch. You want to start the top stitch at the bottom of each zipper tab. I use a regular straight stitch and approximately 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You want to do the same thing down both sides of the zip. The reason we're not sewing all the way along the fabric is because leaving those side seams open makes everything so much easier for us when we sew the panels together. Snip away any of those loose threads, and now we can move on to the D-ring tab. Fold the fabric in half widthways and iron. Open that back up and then fold each of the sides into that centre line and give it a really good iron. You can then fold that in half again and give it one last iron. If you'd like, you can add some clips or pins to hold it together. Take that over to your sewing machine and using a regular straight stitch and sew in as close as you can to the edge, sew down each of those long edges. There's no need to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once that's done, you should be left with something that looks like this. Slide the D-ring to the centre of the fabric, then fold the tab in half and place it onto the front main panel. I've added a guide for this on the pattern piece. Make sure you're only attaching the D-ring tab to the outer panel and not to the lining. You can keep your D-ring tab as long as you'd like. I have mine so that there's about 1 inch of overhang at the raw edge. You can then clip that in place. Using a regular straight stitch, you can sew that to secure it. Now we're going to make the wristlet strap. Fold the fabric in half lengthways, wrong sides together. Give that a really good iron. Open it back up and fold each of the sides into that centre line. Give that a good iron. Fold that in half once more and give it a final iron. Slide the lobster clasp roughly to the centre of the fabric. Use some clips to hold it in place. Open up the fabric on both ends and line up those two short edges, right sides together. You can use clips or pins to hold it in place. Using a regular straight stitch and a 1/2 inch seam allowance, sew straight down that short edge, back stitch at the beginning and the end. Finger press that seam open and then fold the fabric back in, following those pressed lines. Once that's folded back in, you can use some pins or clips to hold it together. Then take it back over to the sewing machine and using a regular straight stitch and a 1/8 inch seam allowance, sew the open edge closed. You can keep sewing all the way around and you can just carefully move the lobster clasp as you go. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once that side's done, you can repeat the same thing with the other side. And it should look something like this. Slide the lobster clasp to that chunkier section of fabric where we sewed the 1/2 inch seam allowance. I find it's best if the lobster clasp sits at the bottom of that section. You can add some clips to hold this in place. Using a regular straight stitch, sew straight across that edge, back stitch at the beginning and the end. The fabric here can be a little bit thick, so do take care when you're sewing. Now we need to attach the ruffles. Align the raw edge of the ruffle to the raw edge of the outer panel, starting and stopping roughly 1/2 inch from the top edge. Clip or pin them to hold them in place. Make sure you're only attaching the ruffle to the outer panel and not to the lining. Using a regular straight stitch, sew the ruffles in place. It's now time to sew the pouch together. I didn't show it here, but you want to open your zip just over halfway. This will make everything much easier when we turn everything right side out. Align the outer panels right sides together and align the lining panels right sides together. You want to push the zip so it points towards the lining fabric. Do this on both sides. Now open up those side seams. If you find it easier, you can give them a really good iron before you start. Repeat the same steps for the opposite side. Now you want to use clips or pins to clip around the entire outer edge. You want to leave an opening of about 4 inches in the bottom of the lining panels. This is what we'll use to turn the fabric right side out. Using a regular straight stitch and 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, sew from one point of your opening all the way around until you get to the other point of the opening. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. Take care when you get to the area with the zipper tabs. You want to sew as close as you can to those, but without actually sewing over them. The fabric does tend to be quite thick here, so just make sure you take it nice and slow. Trim down the excess from the D-ring tab, and then you can carefully turn the fabric right side out. Gently push out all of the corners and the zipper tabs and make sure you're happy with how everything's looking. Snip away all of the loose threads. Now for the last piece of sewing, all you need to do is close that opening in the lining. I do this by folding in the fabric about 1/2 inch and then using a regular straight stitch and sewing as close as I can to the edge. You can then push the lining into the bag, give it one final iron, Clip on the wristlet strap, and then your quilted Ruffles zipper pouch is complete. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial.
I would love and appreciate if you could give this video a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel.
Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.